Welcome to the Always On podcast. I am your host, Duncan MacPherson. And on this podcast, our objective is to enable our audience, which are very high caliber fee-for-service professionals, to always be working on their business and on themselves. On today's podcast, I had a really in-depth conversation with Robert Montella. He's a very respected coach and consultant in the financial services space. He is a business consultant with First Trust Portfolios, with an unrivaled team of specialists. And in this conversation, we talked about moving upstream. And we presented many actionable strategies. And Rob's got many resources available for you to bring them to life. But we talked about, obviously, legacy and multi-generation business development. We talked about the Client Advisory Council and making your clients the voice you listen to level up. Very, very thorough. So if you like this podcast, please like and share and tell your colleagues. And of course, if you have any ideas for topics or themes that you'd like to hear down the road, just let us know. Thanks for listening. Well, you know by now that Pareto Systems is a coaching and consulting firm primarily in the financial services space. And of our 240 teams that we're currently engaged with, they are at some point in the progression, starting with growing. And as you know, we're big on organic growth and being found by new clients, not going out and trying to find them. And then, of course, as somebody grows, they have HR and business development issues that take them into teaming. And that's the shift from having a book of business to an actual business. And then, of course, if somebody is very ambitious, they keep going from teaming to scaling, which is the next frontier. And that's very exciting. And then, of course, every business is built to be sold when it comes to maximizing the value of your business and your life's work in terms of exiting. So growing, teaming, scaling, exiting. If you're listening in, I'm not sure where you are in that progression, but I have a tremendous guest, a real authority in this space named Rob Montella. And you all probably know by now that Pareto Systems collaborates deeply with First Trust Portfolios, who's the unrivaled advocate of the financial professional. I've had Chris Jepson on, Kevin Bishop, Jackie Wilkie, David Rutherford. Rob is the newest member of that team, and we're very fortunate, Rob. You and I have bumped into each other and worked together on a couple of really good events. I've gotten to know your philosophy and approach, and I'm glad we could make this work and you could work us into your schedule because you are a busy guy. So thanks for being here. So I'd like everybody to understand a bit of your backstory. I know I've gotten to know you, and you really refined and optimized your approach working at Goldman Sachs as a coach and consultant to elite teams. Add some color to that. Talk to us about who your ideal team is. Talk to us about your tenure at Goldman Sachs, and then talk to us about a day in the life with First Trust, and let's build on that.
Glad to do that, Duncan. Again, thank you for having me. So Goldman Sachs was an interesting foray for me. I'd spent the previous 13 years at Ameriprise Financial,
Right,
both as a coach for the internal, kind of captured Ameriprise advisors, and then as a coach as they tried to distribute products outside of the firm. And that's how Goldman found me. So when I joined Goldman Sachs, advisor consulting was a startup. So the firm decided it wanted to get serious about approaching RIAs. And originally we had to charge for our services. And then over time, as the efficacy of the experiment proved itself, we became just a full force within the firm. And so the kinds of teams that I work with were typically teams that are, front end of the middle of the bell curve looking to become excellent. So these weren't people that needed to be told what to do. They were managing and navigating their own success and trying to get better more than anything else. And so that was kind of our ideal client, because as you can imagine, as we're bringing some of the more sophisticated investment solutions to the market, we were working with advisors that were open to that were working with wealthier clients.
Right.
And then interestingly enough, as I started conversations with First Trust, they were interested in my expertise in working with wealthier clients, given my background at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, very excellent, concise, and to the point. And obviously, that lines up with us. I mean, as I've gotten to know you better, we are just simpatico in terms of how we see the world. And I do
Yeah.
love that sweet spot of the advisory team that has tremendous momentum. You know, they're self-motivated. You don't want it more than they do, but they're also humble to the point where they say, okay, we need an outside set of eyes here to help us get from here to there. So that's excellent. I want to spend some time primarily today in the growing area because growth is such a big issue and a huge opportunity right now. We call it growing up market. You call it moving upstream. I think it's pretty much the same. Give us your definition in terms of, the why, the what, the how. It's obviously not as simple as saying, okay, I'm just going to work with higher net worth clients. It's more complex than that. So I'd love your perspective.
Sure. It's about moving up from where you are. That's the simple answer. But if I were to expand it a bit, the definition of high net worth is different depending on who you talk to. And there are plenty of data sources in the industry that are a little inconsistent, but I pay attention to the World Wealth Report. And over the past handful of years, interesting trend in that as global wealth has expanded, it's become more top heavy. So big gap between wealthy and not. And the definition of high net worth has expanded. Like there's a wide band, but also the floor has doubled over the last handful of years. So 2 to 10 million is high net worth, but it really goes to where you are today. If we're dealing with a successful practice that's still kind of in startup mode and their marketplace suggests you deal with mass affluent clients that are more blue collar, to say, hey, start working with $7 million clients, that's not going to happen. So your marketplace sort of dictates, and also what you're willing to offer, what you're willing to do in terms of how you talk about yourself, what you're willing to do in terms of how you market yourself will dictate that as well. So it's about moving up from where you are. So as you know, in your coaching world, in your coaching efforts, if there's too much of a gap between current state and desired state, it's really difficult for someone to build momentum because they're so focused on that big gap. So if someone's average client's $1 million, it's about getting to 2. If their average client's 2, it's about getting to 4. And so that's what I mean by moving upstream, but more significantly and more specifically, it's about exploring and exposing the overlooked and undervalued tactics on the margin within the practice that'll help you attract, serve, and retain that wealthier person. There's a difference. It doesn't appear wholesale, but there are some things you need to do on the margin.
Okay, very enlightened insights there. And, it's interesting as you were talking about the World Wealth Report and just giving your insights. Not too long ago, a friend of mine put me in possession of a concept I had not heard about called the Cantillon effect. And the Cantillon effect speaks to what you're talking about in terms of the gap between the high net worth and some of the mass clients, even the clients that are maybe trending in the right direction. And a lot of this has to do with how much money has been injected into the economy in the last 5, 10, 20 years. It's pretty colossal number. So the first thing that comes to mind for me, I'd like your perspective on is when is somebody ready to go from 2 to 4? Like, is there a specific moment where they've earned the right to move upstream like that? Have you gotten into that?
A bit. And so the question always is, do we get the practice ready or we start telling our story and build it as we go? That's always the challenge, right? When someone's brand new in the business, to avoid the uncomfortable marketing of themselves and going out and finding clients, they try to learn about estate planning. So I think that's the big conundrum. And so I think what you have to do is be willing at least to explore and expose gaps in your offering, in your knowledge, and in the way you have the client conversation, the way you conduct the client conversation. If you're willing to do that, I think you're going to be just fine. But the starting point, Duncan, is really like, how do you talk about yourself differently in the marketplace?
Okay. So yeah, sorry. So let's make sure we get there around the professional contrast and how to differentiate. But, it's interesting as you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, it makes sense that what are the gaps you have in terms of the deliverables and what are the unmet needs currently of the addressable audience? And how can you demonstrate the alignment? Because that's my next question, Rob, is what is the best place? Where's the best place to start when looking to attract? And I'm glad to use the attract because you want to attract, not chase. Where does somebody start? Like, let's just sort of ease into that.
Yeah. So you know this in your coaching world. You have to have an awareness of what the gaps are, and you have to accurately assess where the gaps are. And so when someone wants to move upstream, we try to start in our consulting business with, is the gap in attracting, is the gap in serving, and is the gap in retaining? And regardless of where the gap is, it's important to use data to understand where you should start. And one of the things I'd recommend advisors do is they pay attention to what I would call hire and fire criteria for wealthier clients. Because as someone is more wealthy, the criteria they'll use to decide to keep or find a new advisor changes. So in the 2 to 10 million range, let's start with fire criteria. 7 of the top 10 reasons advisors are fired by wealthier clients, not surprisingly, are service related. So I don't care what words you use, lack of accessibility, responsiveness, follow through it. 7 of the top 10 are service related, consistent with mass affluent. But the other 3 are where you want to pay attention. It's, I've outgrown my advisor. The new advisor offers service and service says the other one didn't. And then the other one's pretty interesting, which speaks to higher criteria. I want to work with someone who specializes in my current situation, meaning they don't believe the other advisor did. They may have, but they don't believe that the advisor did. And so on the higher criteria side, the chief consideration moves from promise of better service to brand and reputation. So I always start with, to use your phrase, how do you articulate in writing and how you talk about yourself that professional contrast? How do you stand out? How do you paint a picture the wealthier person can see themselves as a part of? And so when someone comes to me and proclaims, hey, we want to move upstream, the first question I ask in return is, how are you going to talk about yourself differently? Because wittingly or unwittingly, your practice is designed from a positioning and branding standpoint to attract what you have. And so we begin with what's going to be different in terms of positioning in the marketplace.
Feeling like you've hit a plateau? Or maybe you're growing, but it's costing you time, energy, and clarity. At Pareto Systems, we've created the ultimate guide to financial advisor coaching. A no-fluff, insight-packed resource to help you assess if coaching is right for you. Whether you're just starting out, scaling up, or preparing to transition your business, this guide breaks down what to expect, what to avoid, and how to make the most of the process. Download it now. The link is in the description of this podcast. And now, back to the show.
Okay, that is very interesting. You know, it's interesting from my perspective because I automatically think about branding in terms of some of the deliverables we create. And when you said hire and fire, the first thing I heard was hire, like go hire. So hire, that speaks not just to the client and the advisor's ambitions. Like if I've had a liquidity event and I'm a little bit underwhelmed with my advisor, I might think, okay, now I'm ready. And then of course my accountant starts chirping and a friend starts chirping, hey, you've got to step it up. Your needs are more complex. Hire, fire, that's an interesting psychology. And I love what you said there, because when we have an advisor who tells us they lost a substantial client, and it's often not long after they've inherited some money or sold a property or a business and had a massive influx. And the advisor calls and says, okay, I just lost like a $12 million client. And we're like, okay, so this is either going to serve you or hurt you.
That's right.
And they always say, well, I want it to serve us. So first thing we say is call the now departed client, tell them you respect their decision, tell them that you want to level up and make this a very helpful experience. And then ask 2 questions. Number 1, why did you leave? It's not uncommon the client will say, well, it's nothing personal. It just seems like this new team, they've got this more all-encompassing approach. I mean, they do this, they do this, they do this. Every single thing they list off, the former advisor could have done, which, to your point, basically means they became their own best-kept secret because of their lack of a brand identity and being able to articulate the value. And then, the next question, what is it specifically that your new team proposed? And therein lies like the client's ability to socialize their interpretation. It basically confirms they had a perception of the former advisor based on familiarity and loyalty fatigue that I've outgrown you. So I love this. So let's get into the weeds on how somebody can level up in the brand identity and articulating value. I think this would be incredibly helpful.
Sure. So there's two parts to thinking about your branding. There's the development behind the scenes where you brainstorm with your team and try to figure out what to say. And then there's the actual implementation.
Right.
When it comes to the brainstorming, there are 4 classic mistakes advisors make, as I've learned in my 30 years of doing this kind of work. The first thing, and this is really important as you move upstream, is you have to make sure you're answering with clarity and consistency and conviction. Here's why you should hire me. Worry less about the cute and pithy way to describe what you do. Worry less about the cute and pithy way you describe your process. Summarize all that. Those are important ingredients, but summarize all that into why should I hire you? And in figuring out why I should hire you, don't overthink it. The more you think about it, the worse it gets. But then you want to package it. Duncan, I would submit that most advisors who are in that sweet spot that you and I work, right, they're navigating their own success. They're not broken. They're navigating their own success and trying to figure things out. They're probably saying many of the right things that allow them to move upstream, both in print, online, as well as verbally. It's just not packaged properly. So paying attention to packaging becomes really important. And then I think finally, from a development perspective, it's important not to operate in a vacuum, right? So if you want to know why someone should hire you, take someone who's in segments, your new ideal, out for lunch, breakfast, coffee, dinner, drinks, whatever, and ask them why they hired you. I would argue that if the person's thoughtful, they can offer perspective that you didn't consider, or there's things that you dismissed because you think they're basic and understood, but they turned out to be really important. So that's development. And then from an implementation perspective, I think single story selling of the practice is really important. And forgive me for kind of jumping into role play mode, but if I'm in a team that's large enough to describe what that evolution you were describing, I've got multiple client facing people. Everyone should have the same story that they tell. So let's say you're the prospective client, it's Duncan. Before we discuss next steps, what I'd like to do is describe what our team at XYZ Wealth Management brings to the table for you and your family. And in doing so, answer the most important question of all in summary, which is why should you hire us? Our experience tells us clients hire us for 3 reasons. Properly packaged, 3 is, that. It's an adult learning principle designed to aid memorization and repeatability, but also numerically sequenced. First, this happens, and this happens, but also balance, right brain, left brain. Not too much trust, love, care, not too much experience, discipline, process. It's a balance of all that. So they should communicate process, capabilities, bedside manner in that order. And then the process, capabilities, bedside manner summarized to the why should be threaded through to any piece of marketing collateral and any piece of positioning online. And you got to pay attention to online behaviors right now. Video will certainly slow people down, but they don't want to read a lot. So when someone Googles the financial advisor today, typically it's about a minute they'll spend. And you want to pay attention to the 30 seconds they'll read before they go hunting for pictures and answer presumed questions that are on their minds. And you've heard these value ladder questions before. It's, hey, Duncan, I know why you're here. Let's get some of these questions out of the way. Here's who we are. Here's what we are. Here's what we do. Here's for whom we do it. Here's where we do business. Here's our why. And then finally, here's why you should hire us. And that should be a 30-second read. And but the language, I love your phrase. I've been using your phrase, professional contrast. Clarity of message is more important than creativity in our business. And I would argue that just the attempt to answer the why with clarity and conviction in and of itself provides a little bit of professional contrast. And then you can highlight in your messaging points of distinction for the team.
Right.
But it's about answering those presumed questions. And so that's where I would start. It's always how you talk about yourself. Think of higher criteria. Brand and reputation becomes really important. In that example you were sharing with the $12 million client, it's oftentimes when an advisor is fired, let's say the service is great. So the 7 of the 10 reasons advisors are fired for service related is off the table. It's usually a major financial milestone that sends that money in motion. And so as they're looking you up, as they're conducting due diligence on you, can you paint that picture they can see themselves as a part of by answering the why?
Okay. Well, first of all, I love the whole mindset of brevity, specificity, and proprietary. Brevity, you just get to the point, 30 seconds. Specificity, the 3 things. And proprietary, you can only get this from us. It's not everywhere else. This is here, and this is what you've been looking for. So the positioning there is perfect. And you're right. I mean, we've been around this block so many times where teams kill it in complexity, right? It's just so much. And you need that sort of tip of the spear, the hook, to get somebody to sort of latch on and then sort of give you their interpretation and give you permission to then elaborate to a more captive audience. Rob, and this is Pareto 101, but the exercise we have that I think is hand in glove with what you just described, the framework we have for a value proposition is, if you're going to ask the question, why should you hire us? It comes down to who's your ideal client? What do they want? How do you get them there? And then call it something. So to just sort of bookend this, we're part of a financial services team. We work primarily with successful business owners, professionals, and executives who aspire to that work optional lifestyle. They want to get to a point where they want to do what they want because they love doing it. So we have developed and refined a process that puts all the pieces of that puzzle together as a client's life unfolds. And we call it the XYZ formula. Like actually giving it a name, giving it an identity. Now it's a thing. It's a brand within the brand. Every team is branded their practice. We want them to brand their process an extension of the practice and turn that into an intellectual property. So again, I'm not surprised, but we're philosophically completely in sync.
Duncan, 100%. I want to point something out for people listening that's really important, is what you just verbalized to me is an example of outstanding online positioning. But what I like about it is it's not dissimilar from how you'd suggest someone talk about themselves. So oftentimes what you see is you hear a team of advisors describe themselves in very eloquent ways, but you go online and it's nothing like what they say.
Right.
So that written word, spoken word alignment is really important. So for those of you at home that took notes on what Duncan just said, that's the kind of thing you'd say and put in print. And that's when it's lined up perfectly and you're painting a picture that person can see themselves as a part of.
Okay, great observation. Now, I'm excited about the era we're in and the era that we're heading into. I think it's going to be absolutely spectacular, and I'm sure you've seen this too, but now we see advisors at a minimum who are getting massive validation on their approach and sometimes even insights on refinement and optimization using AI. Like I'm a financial advisor. I can go into AI right now and say, look, I'm a financial advisor. I'm looking to move upstream. My ideal client has been typically this type of person at this stage in their life, and typically investable assets of around $2 million. Well, we've developed a process now. We are now worthy of being in the $4 to $5 million ideal client range. How do I get there? And within 3 seconds, AI puts together an incredible framework. And then you can flip that and then say, okay, I'm a high net worth investor. I've just had a pretty significant liquidity event. I think I've outgrown my advisor. I'm about to meet a new one. Help me establish if there's a good fit. What questions should I ask? And boom, now you have this, again, completely aligned perspective. And at a minimum, just to validate that you're on a good path, to your point about professional contrast. Now, I'd love your insight on this because I've heard you present a few times. You get into some real nuts and bolts here. Let's talk about expectations. What are the differences in the expectations between a $1 million client who's aspiring to financial independence to somebody who is actually financially independent and has the ability now where their money can make more money than they do? What is the difference of the mindset, the perspective, and the expectations of those people?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that at a basic level, and this is true in any service in which a wealthier person would engage. There's an expectation that they have some input on their experience, that the experience is tailored to them, but not tailored to them based on something that happened behind the scenes, that they expect to have input on their experience. And I think for the firms and practices that are moving up market, the major shift at a fundamental level as it relates to their service offering and the services that they bring to the table is that are developing a cadence of soliciting client input to form the menu, to form the conversation, to form everything. And I've had advisors come to me and say, well, I've asked clients for feedback in the past and I'm not surprised by what I got. It was kind of puddle deep. And what I would submit is that if that's the case, you're probably asking the wrong people the wrong questions. So you don't necessarily go after client feedback based on the amount of money they have or the revenue they generate. It's also how thoughtful are they? Can they take it from head to mouth or heart to mouth and put it into a usable format for you? So, and there's 3 ways now that advisors are doing this. There's simple surveying, and depending on whether or not you're independent or you're affiliated with a large broker dealer, that'll kind of put some limitations on how you can do it, but you still should. Advisory councils, advisory boards are having a moment right now, Duncan.
Yep.
We're getting a lot of requests for these at First Trust, I can tell you that. And then for the Godfather fans out there, if you just get yourself a Tom Hagen, right, a practice consigliere or 2, someone who's thoughtful, maybe someone who's run a business, and let them under the tent. But again, you have to be very specific. A quick story, if I may, Duncan. Yeah. One of my last acts of defiance at Goldman, and I say that tongue in cheek, loved my time there, was I facilitated a client advisory board for a large RIA in La Jolla, California. And there were 25 or 26 total clients in the room, 18 buying units, very wealthy. And this firm, I give them a lot of credit because it was our collaboration that helped me jump to this conclusion or arrive at this conclusion. The conversation was amazing. They gave the clients pre-work. And what they did in one evening is they sniffed out a big gap in a frequency of contact, how often the firm thought the client should have face-to-face meetings in particular, versus how often the clients wanted to meet. So it was double. They're off by 100%. So 50% of. And
so, Rob, sorry, the advisory team was under communicating based.
No, they had too many face-to-face meetings.
Oh, it was the other way. Okay, that's
the counter was fine. Yeah, so the communication was just fine. The client started picking on the face-to-face meetings, and then when they got granular, the client was saying, "We spend too much time talking about things we could have looked up before we got here. You don't need to read our statements to us." And some clients were interested in a market update, some weren't. But the advisors would do the market update regardless. That was their thing that they do. And then what the firm did, this is really interesting. They listed, I think there was 27 proactive outbound service activities. And they asked the clients to rank each one a 6-point scale. 6 is this is great. 1 is this is a waste of time. They found there were 3 things they killed themselves to do that clients don't care about. And they were time consuming. Clients don't care about it. This one's interesting, Duncan. They asked the clients, what do you wish we offered that we don't? More than half of what was shared were services the firm already offered and the clients didn't know it. right? So go back to hire and fire criteria. I outgrew my advisor. The other advisor, the new advisor has services the other one doesn't. So if you take a look at industry data, the last time I looked at the Cerulli data on this one, for wealthy clients, they expect to have input on their experience. They want the multidisciplinary relationship. And they want that family CFO, the quarterback coordinator, what analogy you want to use. They want that. But the uptake is inconsistent with the stated desire. And it's usually, my hypothesis is the advisor has oftentimes some meaningless and irrelevant items on the service menu that weren't based on client feedback. They were based on something they heard somewhere. And the client wants to have conversations about family relationship management, wealth education, lifestyle, health, but we spend time face-to-face going over the markets and reading my statements to me. How do you align that? So it's really about client feedback and then a willingness to execute. You mentioned to me, or the first question you asked to me, was at a high level, how do you know someone's ready? And it's a willingness to explore and expose gaps in what they offer, how they talk to clients, what they do with clients, knowledge, the willingness to make connections. Wealthy clients care about the contact list more than anything else. So as it relates to service, my guess is most advisors are doing the right things to satisfy clients, but the finer point comes from being in a position to solicit that feedback and use it in a way to make sure that what the service and services offered are meaningful and relevant to the target audience. So it really feels like a tailored experience. And then when you call it something, like your process is probably more about investments or financial planning, but that's when it really begins to take hold.
Most CRMs promise efficiency, but too often they just add complexity, more clicks, more confusion, and less time with clients. Toolkit CRM was built to change that. It's simple, intuitive, and designed specifically for financial advisors. What makes it different? Toolkit isn't just software. It's Pareto's best practices hardwired into your day-to-day process. It's the client experience engine that ensures consistency, elevates every interaction, and brings the Pareto philosophy to life in your business. If you want a CRM that actually works for you, instead of the other way around, take a look at Toolkit CRM. To learn more, visit toolkitcrm.com and schedule a no-obligation demo and see how easy it is to bring the best practices to life in your business.
Well, and of course, in this era, with the advent of alternative investments, and then, of course, you're looking at the complexity. There's risk management, there's charitable giving, there's preparing heirs, and the continuity and succession dynamics. There's so many more pieces of the puzzle that an advisor can make available that make them fee worthy and strengthen relationships through empowerment. But got to make sure there's no disconnect in terms of articulating that, because sometimes it can come off as being like this opportunistic hunter-gatherer. I'm trying to get wallet share. No. I'm trying to deepen our relationship and make sure you have no gaps and unmet needs as a client. That's the beauty of our process. So this is really good. I think you and I should do a webinar at a minimum called Hire and Fire. And I'm going to lobby you hard to say hire as in go hire and fire. And we should get into these weeds. I think maybe even a white paper to supplement that with some action items would be a good idea. So just park that and you can talk to our crew about maybe exploring that. But I've heard you a few times where you've made some resources available when you're presenting. Do you have anything available that's actionable, like on the client advisory boards and exploring some of this? Is there anything you can make available to people to help them translate this into results?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And sorry if this sounds like a bit of a First Trust commercial, but one of the things that I do appreciate about our firm is we recognize that advisors love ideas, but they dislike blinking cursors. And so, to the extent that we can get you off blinking cursor, off blank page, we have tools available. And as it relates to this topic, then I'll go back to what I was talking about with messaging. For this topic, we have a couple of things. We have a great template for the survey itself. And it's less about the survey. As you look at these tools, it's more about the questions asked. It's clear that this thing is designed to help sniff out gaps in service offering, service frequency, to make sure you're aligned. So we have that for sure. As it relates to advisory boards, if you were to stack rank all the things you could do within the practice to enhance the client experience, advisory boards rank high in two categories: potential impact to the business and degree of difficulty. You want to make sure you do them right. And so we have an end-to-end advisory board guide, and my team can do anything for you, from helping you think through invitations, think through the actual invitation itself, agenda setting. And me personally, I've facilitated dozens of end investor client advisory councils, and we just have a deep expertise in how to do them right.
Okay, excellent. And have you put any of those, or are you planning to put some of those through AI, like a read AI functionality, and extract out names and specifics just to give somebody sort of a fly in the wall experience around what it's like to actually be in the midst of one of these? Is this something you're looking at?
Yes, 100%.
Okay,
as you know, we're aligned at First Trust with your firm in terms of the power of AI. We leverage it consistently. And I'll say that the advisory board guidance was run through AI, and we exposed a handful of gaps in the content that we have already that we hadn't considered. So yes.
Okay, beautiful. And for those of you who are maybe thinking, okay, been there, done that. I've done a client advisory council or something like this, 7 years ago. Yes, it was great, but I've checked that box. We're moving on. This is something to make your clients the voice. And we've had advisory teams actually do it just for strategic partners as well. Accountants, lawyers, and other influencers in their sphere. Phenomenal. This is not a one and done. This is something that you can revisit. I know some teams that do it on a yearly basis, sometimes with the same people, sometimes they rotate. There's a real sense of achievement and belonging for a client to be invited, especially business owners. It's amazing when an advisor says, wow, I had a client who owns a manufacturing business, and sure enough, it's 80-20. He's got about 30 clients of his 200 that carry the freight. I did a client advisory council for a group of these clients, and they're saying I should do this for their clientele. Like, it's such a magnificent idea. So keep that in mind. And of course, one of the things that's often revealed now, and more so now, is this multi-generational reality. I mean, we've all heard endlessly about how much money is going to change hands, and the studies on demography. But clients are kicking that can down the road, but the writing's on the wall, because they're asking the advisor now, hey, what does it look like for us when you retire? When are you out? Mm-hmm. And I Chris Jepson and I have talked about this endlessly. Like, don't wait for your clients, because there's code there. If somebody says to their financial advisor, hey, when are you retiring? They care about you, but they're ultimately thinking about themselves. Like, what does it look like for us? So can we wrap up by exploring some of those dynamics? Because I know you and Jackie, you guys are masters at this. So I'd like to hear your insight there.
Sure. And I'm going to start with two things that are very specific, Duncan. And Jackie and I are aligned in that we think that the guidance provided to financial advisors by people who do what we do for a living is spot on accurate. Sometimes it's incomplete. And so there are a couple of gaps that really need to be closed to be able to work successfully in a multi-generational basis. But taking a step back, like the altruistic side is, I view your family as my client, not just you. The business side is asset retention is a growth strategy. Right. And the business side is, for wealthier clients, legacy, even though it's a word that's thrown around like parade candy and been watered down, it still resonates, and people, it fits. And if you have designed a process around it with a name, that can separate you, provide that professional contrast in the marketplace. But the two areas that we think represent really the lowest hanging fruit in terms of asset retention and differentiation are, number one, the non-CFO spouse. The wealthier someone is, the more likely it is there's someone who manages the household, pays the bills, and the other person messes with the investments. That's very likely. That's the truth in my household. So it's about recognizing risk, assessing risk in the book of business. How many households in my book of business is that the case? I've got a great client, great relationship. I barely know the other person who's not as interested in the investments. Now, the what to do about it, that could be, the advisor could figure that out. They forgot more about their clients than we know, but it's about assessing risk and not making assumptions. So a lot of times in our industry, we look past that non-CFO spouse at the adult children or the teenage children and start thinking about them versus that non-CFO spouse. And you've seen this data before. When the primary client passes away, if there's not a relationship with the non-CFO spouse, the money is gone pretty quickly. Transferred out, gone. So focus there. But as it relates to the next generation, there's something that really is specific enough that it almost seems too granular. But at a high level, philosophically, you got to not accept a client with $5-10 million saying, I don't care what happens to the money when I'm gone. Meaning, I don't care what the kids do with it. They might be charitably inclined, but if they say that, I'd be hard pressed to accept that. And that's an uncomfortable conversation. And so governance and legacy should be the focus for the next generation. The challenge, Duncan, as you know, if you ask 10 clients, what's your definition of legacy, you'll get a whole bunch of I don't knows. You get a couple of educate the grandkids, and you maybe get one or two awesome answers. So really, to be involved as the advisor, I need the clients to come up with an awesome answer. I need them to have emotional and mental clarity on what legacy means to them. What impact do they want their assets to have when they're gone more than anything else? And the way to get there is ultimately to drive to a question. So if you're my client, what I want to do is be able to ask you, Duncan, in a perfect world, do your assets and heirs remain under our care when you're gone? And if you say no, that's disappointing but helpful. But if you say yes, then it becomes, how do we do it? But the way to get there is to get your definition of legacy documented. Well, let's back up from that. If legacy is thrown around a lot, you don't really know how to think about it. If I had some case studies of well-known people where legacy wishes weren't documented and estate planning was a mess, and look what happened, that might help. It certainly would help if I had a practice-wide definition of what legacy means. So for you, I can get the creative juices flowing. One of the best I've ever heard, there was this practice in Austin, Texas. These guys are funny. They wanted to role play their definition with me. I ran this pilot where people were trying to get this legacy thing figured out. And what they said to me really is really powerful. And there's a tool here that I'll describe in a minute. But they go to their clients, they say, what we want to do is put some pen and paper around your definition of legacy. But to help you, maybe hearing ours might get the juices flowing. So here's how we think about it. Our wealthy, values-based clients die 3 times. Death 1 is when they die. Death 2 is when the money that's used by their heirs isn't used in the way they intended, going back to governance. But then the third thing they say is, the third death is when people stop talking about him and all the traditions go away. And that's heartstring stuff. And so what we've done at First Trust is we've developed this legacy questionnaire that helps uncover some of those things. And it gets not just to, hey, what do you want on your headstone? I mean, some cool questions like that, but it gets to traditions that have to be passed on no matter what. Money lessons you want. And I would submit, if an advisor knew that and had a really good handle on family dynamics, the back door is closed.
Yeah.
Right? They're working with that family on a multi-generational basis, period. So I would just argue, if you focus on that, the non-CFO spouse, and get to legacy, client wanting you involved, the likelihood of the client wanting you involved goes way up.
You reminded me, and you covered a lot of really essential ground there. you reminded me of a conversation I had with an advisor a while back. Somebody put me in touch with the book Die with Zero.
Hmm.
And I went on chat, I asked for a debrief, and admittedly, I have not read the entire book, but I've gone into it using AI, and the whole premise is basically give yourself permission to live your life and enjoy the fruits of all your efforts. And it's such a great mindset. Anyway, I was talking with an advisor. We had a really good conversation about that. And he happened to float this because he was really big on the dash, right? The dash between start, finish, the dash. He's really big on that. That's part of his value prop. And clients love it. There's a poem, right? It's really good. Anyway, he's talking to this client who is their grandparents. And he's talking about Die with Zero. And he said, the conversation was incredible because he's basically giving this affluent couple permission. Like, don't deprive yourself. You've earned this. Anyway, my point is, what was fascinating is they bought in, they booked a couple of trips, they indulged a little bit, nothing too over the top. But then I guess one of I don't know if it was the non-CFO, I'm not sure what it was, probably the dad. And he said, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna move in this direction of dying with zero. But he said, honestly, I'm gonna skip the meat in the sandwich, and I still want to provide some for my grandkids. But my kids, nah, they're set, they're fine, they don't need anything. And the advisor had this profound sort of eureka moment that there's nothing you can do to talk somebody out of that generation. But of course, the sandwich, the middle of the sandwich, if there's a deliberate array of value to their kids within that family tree, that's a deepening of a relationship within the family tree. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you because you got me thinking about that. Okay, so where can somebody go from here? So the legacy questionnaire, the client advisory council, those are specific resources somebody can get. How can somebody find you? I know you're connected with me on LinkedIn. Is that the best point of entry, or through a wholesaler accessing you? What's the best way?
Yeah, local wholesalers is great. First Trust website, if you have a login, all the advisor consulting tools are there. Connect on LinkedIn as well. What's interesting about the approach we take, we can do coaching, which of course Duncan does. And also, if your needs are more substantial, we refer all the time to Duncan and Pareto. And that's an invaluable resource. I can't even stress how invaluable that is for us. But also we do something that's kind of interesting, Duncan, is we offer what we call project-based practice management. As you know, when you coach someone and they say, great idea, I'll get that done within 2 months, but then they don't know what to do or where to start. Oftentimes we'll come in and roll our sleeves up and do the work with them and for them, then be done. It's like a starting point, ending point, deliverable kind of thing. So we can help there as well. So if it's messaging, as we talked about at the beginning, if it's those service tools, as we talked about at the beginning, if it's something around this legacy, you can do it yourself, paint by numbers, or you can ask for some help. And in either case, we're front and center, happy to help.
Well, and you just got me thinking. I've been saying for years that the people who like us the most actually need us the least. Like it still boggles my mind who would hire us to help them do better. But that's gone to an entirely new level. I've said to Jepson so many times, it astounds me the caliber of advisory team that gravitates to First Trust. I mean, they're incredibly effective, but again, they have ambition, they have humility, they have contentment. They're not full of bravado. They don't think they're better than anybody else, but they're incredibly effective. But the clay is still soft. I just admire that. And I'm sure that was part of what drew you to First Trust. It's just the culture, the environment, the community. It's absolutely second to none. So, Rob, excellent. I really want to do the Hire and Fire webinar and white paper. I think we should look into that. And I really appreciate your time. You brought a lot to the table here. So thanks very much. And when this is made available, We'll break it up. We'll make sure that people can take some bite-sized chunks from this, but also I'm sure many are going to want to take the entire dive. So closing comments. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Duncan, thank you for allowing us to be here. And for those of you that are interested in moving up market, it's just about those subtle yet significant adjustments on the margin. I'd start with messaging, then go to your offering, and then go to the next gen. So we presented this, and I love how you did the questions in a linear fashion. So that's the way to think about it. So again, our pleasure to be here. If you're looking for some help, you got the guy to my right, as I'm looking at the screen, is the best in the industry. He's a Yoda himself, personified, although much taller. He's Yoda himself, but please, we are front and center should you need something.
Awesome, man. Great job. I really appreciate your time, and we'll cross paths and get these other things knocked off too. So I'm sure I'll see you on the road soon, but until then, thanks very much.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks for your help.
Thank you for listening to Always On with Duncan MacPherson, where our objective is to enable professionals to always be working on their business and on themselves. Want to learn more about Duncan and his team? Visit ParetoSystems.com. Don't forget to click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and/or guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Pareto Systems. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only.